Welcome to this YouTube exclusive right now for the Around the Ropes podcast. Now, guys, obviously you know who I am. You see me on here every time. I'm the guy who always loves to talk. But, guys, we're being joined tonight by somebody who's not only making his debut on the podcast, but he's making his podcasting debut. The one, the only, Jester Jeff himself. What's going on, man?
Jon, thank you so much for having me on your podcast tonight. How's it going downstate?
It's about to start raining soon, so it's going to be fun.
Well, you know, we're sending it all down because up here in Albany, we're drenched for the past couple hours. So,
it's gonna come down pretty hard tonight. But hey, look this way. What we're talking about isn't about the rain. We're talking.
No, and it makes a perfect evening to stay in, take a look at some old wrestling shows, talk about some good memories, and maybe see what's going to happen tomorrow night.
Exactly, because guys, we're going to be looking at the retro. We're doing a retrospective tonight. That's the first time on this podcast we're actually doing a retrospective of SummerSlam. Because guys, tomorrow night at Ford Field in Detroit, Michigan, WWE has their 35th annual SummerSlam event. Now, Jeff, before we get into obviously what's happening tomorrow night, we're going to kind of go down memory lane a little bit here. What was the first SummerSlam you remember seeing live, either in person or on pay-per-view?
This is easy. You know, it was 1990. We were at camp, honestly, in Sacandaga, and I have two older brothers, much older than me, and they had said they were building me up. I was 8 years old, and they were building me up to be a big wrestling fan, and they were talking about the return of Hulk Hogan. The big storyline of the year was that Hulk got hurt by earthquake on the Brother Love show, and he was going to be making his comeback that year. Now, you know, behind the scenes, he was, busy filming his movies, doing his thing. But little 8-year-old Jeffy there, Jester Jeff, was coming on and made us go home from camp and watch the 1990 SummerSlam. Main event that night was, Ultimate Warrior versus Rick Rude in a steel cage match. It was my first cage match that I ever watched too. So it's quite nostalgic for me to always go back and watch that event, and it just brings up a lot of memories.
It's funny for me. Yeah, I mean, I watched it a little bit growing up in the 90s, but then I stopped watching from about 2002. I came back in 13.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't remember it was, it was 13, was Daniel Bryan had his match with Cena.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what set up Daniel Bryan going up against the Authority. Because if you remember, Orton came in and cashed in.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hunter turned heel as well. But that was my first SummerSlam memory. And that was weird because that was during a time period when SummerSlam every year, I remember at that point, was in Los Angeles, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And no, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to speak over you. Go ahead, Jon. Please finish.
No, what I was just going to say is SummerSlam is one of those events that, even though it's supposed to be a party type event and you always think of it being, warm, do you know actually for the first four SummerSlams, they were all held in the Northeast?
They were. And that's because, the territory at the time, back in the mid to late 80s, was centered out of New York City up here, right around your hometown. Madison Square Garden was their home turf. It was their home arena. So everything was from Detroit east, all the way up through Maine. And it was there, like you said, before it was billed as the big blockbuster party of the summer. I had always viewed it as a chance to kind of create and further storylines that had culminated at WrestleMania.
Well, I know wrestling doesn't have seasons per se, because but I always look at the big four pay-per-views, and I still call it the big four because I know now Money in the Bank is considered a big pay-per-view, but I'll always consider Mania, the Rumble, Survivor Series, and SummerSlam as the four big ones.
Yeah.
And I always look at those as like your season finales.
Mm-hmm.
That, you get, you have your pay-per-view, you have, like you said before, it was what culminated at WrestleMania. But then on the flip side, what starts at SummerSlam would culminate then at Survivor Series.
Well, Jon, you have to remember, prior to Monday Night Raw, we didn't have a means to weekly further these storylines along. Yes, we had Saturday morning showings. Yes, we had simulcast, matches, which were, voiced over in studio. But we didn't have a chance to really, as a mass to watch these events unless you went to them live or you had the USA Network. So the big pay-per-views were so important back then. And then the fifth, which event, it started as King of the Ring, as you said, and then eventually became Money in the Bank. And WrestleMania was kind of the end of a storyline. And then it allowed the summer to kind of, it allowed the WWF at the time, WWE now, to slowly kind of create and build their new storylines, their new characters, new gimmicks up and debut them at SummerSlam. And we'll see as we go along here how important SummerSlam kind of became when it entered, the early 90s.
Well, let's get going now with the first one, because the first one happened to be in Madison Square Garden, as we mentioned before.
Of course.
Back in 1988. Your main event for that one, I actually have the notes right up here. Hold on, it'd be good if I can actually see what I'm looking at. So the Mega Powers take on the team of the Mega Bucks, and Andre the Giant and $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, and the special guest referee was Jesse the Body Ventura.
Jesse the Body's always great in the ring, as we know. That guy could sell, ice cream to an Eskimo. You had Vince McMahon on commentary, which you could call me a mark, call me whatever. I always liked Vinnie Mac when he was on commentary. Just, that exciting, that over the top, oh my, but before we get to the main event, John, you're overlooking one of the biggest matches, one of the most important matches from that card. Ultimate Warrior versus the Honky Tonk Man. Honky Tonk was ICW or Intercontinental Champion for how long leading up to that event? 400 something days. And he issues this wild call out to anybody in the back. And who comes out to one of the biggest massive pops of the time? The Ultimate Warrior.
And you bring up Honky Tonk Man, and we'll get into him a little bit later when we get into our predictions for SummerSlam, because there is a chance that unfortunately his record might be broken pretty soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yes. But
no,
go ahead.
Well, and back then, wrestlers like the Honky Tonk Man, champions, they would be on your weekly match shows on Saturday mornings, like I said, your weekend shows, against jobbers or whatever. They'd come out, do squash matches. But it was always fun to kind of see Honky, come up and do his thing. And they were building the Warrior at the, debuted as the Dingo Warrior, came out as the Ultimate Warrior, and they were just building him. And by the time he came out as the ICW champion in only 31 seconds in that match, that crowd just erupted in New York. They needed that.
But the one comment, and I say this, weekly on our regular show, when it comes to New York, I don't care what part of New York you're in, either it be Buffalo, Albany, Madison Square Garden, or out by me with UBS Arena. The New York crowd is always the most electric, I feel. And they'll be the first ones to tell you if you did great or if you sucked.
They're very vocal. We always have been. And future shows that we're going to do together, we're going to discuss just how big of a heel market upstate New York is and how important that was to development of wrestlers later on down the line, some of which we'll discuss tonight.
But I said that even I know AEW, and we'll get back into SummerSlam momentarily, but I remember AEW was just recently up by you guys.
Mm-hmm. Last week they were here at the MVP Arena.
And the crowd, I like I said, I say this weekly on the podcast. When it's in New York, I don't care. But, I know people are gonna say, "Oh, well, Boston's a big crowd and Chicago's a big crowd." Yeah, those are big crowds. Don't get me wrong, but there's something different when you're in New York. It's just a different feel to me.
It's home field advantage. You listen to your home crowd. It's the same thing, when you go to, a Yankees game and you're listening to the crowd, who's going to be the next big star. And, looking back, it's how the WWE, builds their stars, or used to build their stars, was based upon crowd reaction.
And I feel like they don't get into that now. But let's get now into, because believe me, what I have right now, as far as the notes I have, is I have the main events. That's what I was able to grab.
Yep.
So the next one we got here actually was the second one, happened to occur in East Rutherford, New Jersey, at the former Brendan Bryan Arena, which I think became the Continental Airlines Arena, last I checked.
Okay.
The main events were Brutus the Barber Beefcake and Hulk Hogan take on the team of Macho Man Randy Savage and Zeus.
So this was the breakup of the Mega Powers that had occurred, prior to WrestleMania, just a couple months before. During the summer, No Holds Barred had debuted, and Zeus was the big, massive heel and movie star, the next big thing in Hollywood. So Vinnie Mac brought him into, to the WWF at the time, and this was going to be his big push. So you have Hulk and Beefcake here, taking on Randy Savage, who really, Randy could work a match with, a piece of plywood and make it look good. So Randy carries the match here, but Hulk and Beefcake, they go over, and I give it a 2-star match, honestly. But again, Hulk wins, crowd goes nuts, late 80s. What are you going to do, right?
Exactly. But that, and again,
but
obviously,
if I can interject.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Again, and I hate to really drive home the Warrior, but this was the first pay-per-view where we had Warrior versus Rude, and it was for the ICW championship again. These two knew how to put on a match. They were big guys, muscular, kind of what, the WWF was in back then. The big guys. Rick Rude really knew how to work a crowd just by getting on that mic. He really could upset anybody in the crowd. So.
And the funny thing is, and you bring up Rick Rude, we've had this discussion on this show plenty of times, and I've had this discussion with other people as well. You don't get a heel like you did with Rick Rude anymore.
No, he would get on the bike, and the first thing he'd do is he'd tell everyone to be quiet. So now you're mad at him. Then he'd berate your city. So now you're even more mad at him. Then he'd berate either you as a man or he'd put down you as a female. So now he's working 3 to 4 to 5 different angles, and he'd take that robe off, and he would just have that look, and he would just, flick that oil into the crowd, and you just, again, 5 minutes of watching him, and you hated him before he even did a move in the ring.
But that's the thing, though, is you don't see that now. You don't see. I think you see that more, and I'll be straightforward. You see that more in the independent scene.
Much. Oh yeah, and you and I have seen that show. We talked about this last month when we were at the ICW event. Watching some of those stars, work the crowd and just basic mic skills. It's a lost art.
I've been saying that for the longest time to me, and I put this guy over on the show plenty of times. And Ryan, who's the co-host, laughs at me every time I bring his name up. But you look at a true heel. And I know everybody's going to say, oh, MJF. MJF to me is a cool heel. And we can get into that in later episode. But you look at somebody like Blaze Haram or Ben Hameen. Those guys, as soon as they come out, it doesn't matter if they're both in ICW or Blaze is down at Titan Championship Wrestling. Mm-hmm. As soon as that music hits, the boos are coming.
Well, to get a good heel, you need a look, you need a gimmick. So Blaze comes out with the flag, and he carries a black flag. Could have a Muslim symbol. It could have a skull and crossbones. It could have whatever symbol it has. You know that he's going to be the bad guy just the way he carries himself. Yeah. And he's got that smug face on. Again, that Rick Rude, I'm better than you, I'm bigger than you, I'm taller than you face. And that's why, Blaze is really going to be the future of a lot of these independent, companies.
I said that for a while. I think to me, and like I said, we can get more into that in another episode, but I think to me, Blaze kind of reminds me of like a Rick Rude to an extent.
A little bit, yeah.
I see it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know he's more Iron Sheik than anything with the way he comes out. I think there was one show I had seen him at. Might have been the show in Rome. Was it the show? I think it was the show in Rome that they did. And on his boots had a little bit of that point thing, like the curve, similar to how Sheik did it back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But that to
Yeah,
me,
again,
but I mean, I can put him over till the end of time.
he's just again, it's how you develop your character. It's going to win or work the crowd, and that's how his character gets over. And if we're gonna, if we can use this to actually skip forward to now to 1990,
Yeah.
Again, and this was my first event, we talked about the main event being Warrior versus Rick Rude. Here's another example of Rick Rude coming out in the steel cage. He's got a woman's face painted on his tights in the crotch area. You can't help but boo the guy.
No. But that's what made him so good. I mean,
yeah.
And I mean, that match, actually, I'm going to pull the card up quickly here just because I want to see who else
There's
is
three
on
matches. There's 3 matches I wanted to touch base on that card.
Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
So you got the main event. You got Warrior versus Rude. Warrior goes over. It's a 2-star, maybe a 2.5, 3-star match. Steel cage. It's the old school blue bars. Looks like you're in a jail cell kind of match. And prior to this, you had Hulk Hogan versus Earthquake. Earthquake's another guy, John Tenta. I didn't realize how young he was, but to be going up against Hulk Hogan and move the way he did, they billed him at 400 pounds in the match. He was easily a solid 350, but still to run the way he did, jump, and just the athleticism, he could do drop kicks. Remember, John Tenta was not a small guy. He did sumo wrestling before he got into, pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And my favorite match from 1990 is actually the 2 out of 3 falls match for the WWF Tag Team Championships. The Hart Foundation versus Demolition. Demolition is my favorite tag team of all time. You have another solid in-ring worker with, Bret Hart, who's really at this point starting to come into his own. His confidence is building. The following year, we're going to see him break off into his own. But at this point, Demolition, Axe is getting old. They're going to start bringing Crush more and more. But these two, you could watch Hart Foundation, Demolition, and the British Bulldogs in the 80s. You could watch them wrestle 100 times over and be excited each time.
And it's funny you bring those 3 up because we did a video, probably last year at some point. We did top 10 tag teams of all time.
Rougeau's.
Oh, yeah, all 3 of them are on that list.
The Bulldogs.
Because you brought it up. You just mentioned those 3 names right there. There's a plethora of other tag teams just in that era alone. I mean, we're not even talking Attitude Era yet.
No.
And it's just, and that match I'm looking at right now, that match was actually a pretty long match. That was almost a 15-minute match. According to what I'm looking at right now, it clocked in at 14:24. But most of the other matches.
Yeah, and again, it was a 2 out of 3 falls match. There was a squash match with Sapphire. There was a squash match with, pardon my language, with Dusty and Randy Savage. Just a bunch of kind of matches. But you get to those 3 matches where you have solid worker, huge face, and then the championship match. This was WWF firing on all cylinders, if you ask me. They knew what they were working with. They had a future star in Bret Hart, and I really think that they started to see it, and they really started to push the Hart Foundation as solid baby faces. Remember, 2 years prior, Hart Foundation were heels, Demolition were the faces, so we had a big split there.
Now we get to 91. And 91, again, back in New York City.
Interesting year.
With the main event, because I'm looking at the main event right now. The main event saw Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior at a hardcore handicap elimination match
against Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan, and who was billed as Colonel Mustafa, but was actually the Iron Sheik. Infamous story leading up to this is Warrior was upset. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and Sid Justice was the special guest referee, because it's actually funny I bring his name up, because him and Hogan would have a little bit of a interception, I guess, or paths would cross at the Rumble in 92.
They did. And that was in my hometown in Albany, and I was there live. And when we do a Rumble show, I have some very interesting insight for you about that.
Absolutely.
However, Sid Justice makes his debut, but he's still under kind of a no compete. So he's just in a special guest referee. And, he's billed as the next big man for WWF. He's taller than The Undertaker. He's bigger than Hogan. And as I said, Warrior was upset with the company. So Hogan and Warrior go over, but Warrior's fired immediately after. The other big match I really love from the show was Legion of Doom, who were brought in to replace Demolition at the time. Former Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, they go over the Nasty Boys for the WWF Championship, Tag Team Championship.
Yeah. And what's funny about that is, we just mentioned before in 90, when you had the Hart Foundation and you had Demolition. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just named two other tag teams who most people would say is in their Mount Rushmore of tag team wrestlers.
Yeah, Nasties always get overlooked, if you ask me. Mm-hmm. Brian Knobbs and Jerry Sags, they didn't have the look of Rick Rude. They were your average, everyday looking guys like me. They just came to the ring and they could just work. You didn't think that they could run and move and jump and kick the way they could. But, man, they were nasty in the ring.
Well, then on the other side, you had the Legion of Doom, who obviously people remember them as being the Road Warriors. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, you can't really say anything bad about the freaking Road Warriors.
Well, actually, leading up to SummerSlam, Hawk got busted for steroids and was out of action for a little while. So on the summer shows, live shows, house cards, on the A shows, it was Animal versus the Nasty Boys in a series of, handicap matches. One of those was held in Albany leading up to SummerSlam. Animal ends up going over in a count out. I'll never forget that. But it did kind of highlight future problems down the line with Hawk, unfortunately. But this was at the height of Legion of Doom, Road Warriors' popularity. They were the biggest, baddest tag team on the planet, hardest workers. My friends and I would always try to do, the moves on each other, and we would lift each other up. And I am surprised I can still walk and I don't have a broken neck, courtesy of my friends Jon and John, with all the Boston Crabs and things we did on each other because of the way Nasty Boys and Legion of Doom worked.
Well, now we're about to get to what some would consider to be one of the bigger SummerSlams.
Best SummerSlam of all time. Best of all time.
And here's the other thing also. The first SummerSlam not held in the Northeast.
Wembley Stadium, 1992. Biggest show other than the Pontiac Silverdome WrestleMania 3. I watched it on pay-per-view. And real quick, John, if I could, prior to WrestleMania 9, you got to remember, these shows were not broadcast after the original showing. You had one chance to watch these live. So if you didn't videotape them on your VCR or had a friend do it or go out and buy the VHS tape months later when it came out, you didn't watch these. You had to read about them on the dirt sheets or rely on your friends at school the next day. So I forced my father to get it that year.
Well, the main event for this one was for the WWF Intercontinental Heavyweight Championship. That's how it's being touted, even though we all know it's basically the IC title. And it's our Bret the Hitman Hart take on the British Bulldog.
First time in wrestling, in WWF history that the title was not involved or defended in the main event on pay-per-view. Prior to this, Hogan or Warrior had always been involved in the main event as the champion.
Well, not to cut you off there for a second, but I think this was also the first SummerSlam where Hogan wasn't at, if I remember correctly.
Correct. He was busy dealing with the steroid trial. Mm-hmm. Vince McMahon and he had a dust up over the spring and summer. There was the trial, there was the allegation. So the company was starting to head in another direction here, looking at younger, faster guys. They were looking at more solid in-ring workers. You can see this with the show, with the shows, with the way that Shawn Michaels and Rick Martel go over Crush as a as a singles worker, Ultimate Warrior against Randy Savage. That's just kind of a throwaway match, and you have a couple matches after that. And Bret the Hitman Hart and British Bulldog put on an absolute clinic in the main event.
Here's the funny thing. The biggest thing I remember from this one, and it was the tag team match with Legion of Doom versus Money Inc. Because what
Ellering comes out on the motorcycle with the Rocco.
Yeah, but the pop though.
Absolutely massive.
I mean, the comments always said is, you get a pop, but then you get a Road Warrior-esque pop. I can't think of in recent time any wrestler who either debuted or returned or whatever who got that type of pop.
You're talking John Cena back in 2007 when he came back after the injury, or beyond that. Maybe Triple H when he comes out. Vince McMahon gets a big pop when he comes out. Although after this past weekend or after this past week, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, exactly. Legion of Doom, I would argue, had some of the biggest pops of all time. People were just charged up and energized to see them. And still had a lot of energy in them. By the time the end of the card, the main events came around, energy just wasn't there,
I completely agree. And then we start to get more into the 90s where you're at the point now where
when you got to Bret Hart versus Bulldog, amazing match. Amazing.
I completely. And folks, if you haven't had a chance to watch it or any of these SummerSlams, I highly recommend going back to Peacock, sitting down on a Saturday afternoon if you have nothing else to do, and put on especially the 92 SummerSlam. You're not going to regret it. Trust me on that.
Most definitely. Yeah, you're going to see some old school ring work. You're going to see some old school managerial work, with Bobby the Brain Heenan and Jimmy the Mouth of the South Hart. Really knew how to work a crowd, knew how to work a match. You're going to see some, really just some old school workers who would feed off the crowd. They didn't have to rely on a script. They would listen to the crowd and they would work based upon, again, what the crowd and the energy level was.
Now we're getting into the early 90s when you're starting to see that shift a little bit because you're starting to see WCW make their rise. You're starting to see guys jump ship. You're seeing a lot more. You're seeing a lot more character-esque wrestling at this point. And what I want. No, go ahead.
I was reiterating what you're saying. Yeah, this was the end of the big guy era, and we see this, with Lex Luger in '93. Not getting that huge push he was promised. That big payoff, I should say, getting the push but not the payoff, and you're getting a lot of crazy characters, Duke the Dumpster Droese, and the Goon.
Yeah, you'll get a lot of that now. But the one I want to look at is 94.
All right, so let's go to 94. Now, don't forget, I'd be remiss if I didn't say 93, because remember, that's when Luger slams Yokozuna and he goes on the national tour. It's going to be the biggest thing. Luger's going to be the next Hogan, and he wins by count out. What was all that for,
Well, Jeff, not to make you feel old, but 93 was when I was born.
I'm 11 years old.
So but yeah,
none of my friends really had any interest in Luger. We were Northeast fans. Luger came from WCW, Jim Crockett Promotions. He's huge in the South. We knew who he was, but he wasn't our guy. No.
But I want to look at 94 because that one's sort of the infamous Undertaker versus Undertaker match.
Dumbest match of all time.
Now let me test your trivia here for a second. Do you remember who played the other Undertaker?
Was it Brian Adams?
Brian Lee actually was his name.
Brian Lee, sorry. Brian Lee Harris. I'm sorry. Yeah, Brian Adams is a singer. So I'm sitting at home. It's Saturday morning. I'm watching wrestling, eating cereal. It's in the middle of, I don't know, April or whatever. And prior to this, in Royal Rumble, the real Undertaker gets defeated by Yokozuna in a casket match.
Mm-hmm.
I got tears in my eyes. I'm such an Undertaker huge fan. All right, I'm a kid. Fake Undertaker comes out that year, and I'm like, nah. Now remember, I watched the original Undertaker debut with Ted DiBiase at Survivor Series in '90, so I'm like, really? And then we slowly start to see the storyline, and again, old school storytelling, perfectly, told over the course of months, dragged out. Even though the payoff match was kind of it was still the story itself was mesmerizing.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree on that. But now we're starting to get to the weirder SummerSlams because now we're talking 95, 96.
Well, before, can I just throw one match in from 94? My favorite match from that?
Go right
Owen
ahead.
Hart versus Bret Hart in the steel cage. You talk about two of the best in-ring workers of the 90s, aside from Mr. Perfect and maybe Ric Flair in the 90s. But from 1990 to 2000, and unfortunately Owen Hart died, prior to that, I can't think of two better workers than the Hart brothers.
I will say,
and I challenge you to prove me wrong on that.
Oh, I completely agree because I've always said it. My favorite WrestleMania match is when Owen took on Bret in the opening match at WrestleMania 10.
Yeah, they didn't have to climb to the top rope to tell the story. They didn't need any gimmicks. They didn't need any, weapons. They told a solid family story that just, again, Bret's another guy that could have a match with a table leg and make you feel like you were there and you're part of it.
Oh, yeah, no, exactly. But now it's funny because now we're about to hit 96, 97, and 98. And I say that for one reason, because even though SummerSlam had been around for a while at this point, it was still primarily Northeast still.
Mm-hmm.
The farthest it had gotten. No, go ahead.
You had the rise of Monday Night Nitro, which still was in the South. It was still a territorial program. Oh, so you have WWF, WWE now emerging, still based in the Northeast, still using that old school, their old school storytelling, but now they're developing newer stars. You're starting to see the emergence of Stone Cold Steve Austin, a young Rock, a very young Triple H, and you're starting to see Bret Hart phase out. We've lost Lex Luger. Hulk Hogan's gone. Randy Savage is gone. Ted DiBiase's gone. They've jumped ship, okay? And WWF doesn't have any answer for what's going on. So they just start throwing dumb character after dumb character on us on Monday Night Raw to see what sticks.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's funny because I'm just looking right now, 96 was actually the farthest SummerSlam we had up until that point, because that one was done actually in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah,
that was the farthest it was that we had gotten so far at that point.
By 97, you got Hart turning heel. We know what happens. We know what happens 3 months later with Bret Hart. However, in this event in 1997, he goes over the Undertaker for the championship. However, his contract is up in dispute. One of the greatest missteps of all time in wrestling history. WWF doesn't know what to do with Bret Hart, and Bret Hart wins the championship. However, we got a Stone Cold winning his IC championship, his first IC championship against Owen Hart. But what happened that night, John? You remember?
Wasn't that the infamous pile driver incident?
The pile driver, yeah. Owen Hart, great worker. Again, one of the safest workers. Unfortunately, botched it. Steve Austin wanted him to drop to his knees like a traditional pile driver. Owen said, no, I'm going to drop to my ass. Those were his words, part of my language.
It's fine.
Owen does it. Steve trusts him because he's a Hart. And Steve gets the stinger, and he,
Yeah, his career got shortened a little bit.
Breaks his neck.
Yeah,
but then further story.
I was to say his career didn't last much longer after that. I think his career only
didn't, but it allowed him to come out and work his. Yeah, but he worked his character. You see, he didn't just go off screen like you have some other stars. Unfortunately, he worked his character. He would come out. He would throw his belt in the river. He would. This is when you start seeing, the crazy antics of Stone Cold, and he's starting to, emerge against the powers that be.
We're seeing the beginnings of the infamous rivalry between him and Vince at this point.
Vince, I got a great story, but some great stories about that. The following year in '98, if we look at that, there he is champion against the Undertaker. Undertaker's the kind of guy that he never needed the belt. Him, Kane, Big Show, they never needed the belt. You could put it on him at any time to be a legitimate champion to transition to your next star. They were going to sell out an arena by themselves without the belt. But here we have Stone Cold. And we also have the emergence of DX.
Well, I was going to say, when you mentioned before about, how guys like Taker and Kane didn't need the belt, because the one thing I learned being a wrestling fan, those guys were so over, a belt was never necessary for them.
No. Undertaker wins his first belt in '91, and he holds it for 6 days, and he's still over when he comes out in the Royal Rumble after that. His character told the story, and that's what you mentioned before when you said go back and watch these old shows. Because it was character development based upon they listened to the crowd. They knew how to work the crowd. They didn't go by a script. They were told, okay, get the money, work the crowd.
And the funny thing is, especially now with the era we're in, people forget that the head writer for that was some guy named Vince Russo.
I think Vince Russo gets more hate than he really should get. I know he's over the top. I know he had some crazy storylines, but he worked his butt off and did the best he could, I feel. He's working against, some really big names in the wrestling, behind the scenes.
Oh yeah.
And he'd probably be really good with Hollywood kind of storytelling.
Yeah, but and you said it before, he gets a lot more hate than he should, because I think what happens is people forget, if it wasn't for Vince Russo, we wouldn't have had half the guys we did in the Attitude Era, or half the guys in the Attitude Era I don't think would have ever gotten to the level they would have.
No, he really he pushed the envelope, and he really, I think he helped Vince push the envelope in '97 and '98. And this is when WWF retakes the lead in the Monday Night Wars. It was so big back then. You were born in what? You said 93?
93, yeah.
So you're 4 or 5 years old in 97 and 98. You have no idea how huge this was. I went to a private school. Quick story. I went to a private school. We wore military uniform in high school. We still had DX or NWO shirts on underneath our uniforms. Okay, we would turn them inside out, or we would put a T-shirt over them. But come gym time or come after school, shirt comes off, and you get the chop, or you get the Wolfpack sign, and it's war.
And I think that's what I think a lot of, especially fans nowadays. Like, I've watched bits and pieces on Peacock, and when the WWE Network was still around, I watched bits and pieces.
You're making me feel old, John.
I've done it before, trust me. And I've seen parts of that. So I get that part, but if you talk to a fan now who's like under the age of, I would say 12, for example, and you ask them who DX is or who the NWO is, they're probably gonna look at you and go, who?
Well, that's the same as if, you were to ask me when I was 12 who Pedro Morales was. You have, you know him because you're such a big fan, but back then, we had no concept of wrestling before 1986, before Hulk Hogan, before all that.
Yeah.
They had no concept of wrestling before John Cena. They look at The Rock as, Dwayne Johnson, the movie star. I look at The Rock as, one of the biggest over superstars of all time that used that aura of his presence to get into Hollywood in a positive way.
Or like when especially younger people turn around and like, oh yeah, John Cena, the guy from Fast and the Furious. I'm like,
yeah, I mean, it's the natural progression and transition of wrestling to see, and I'm happy that these stars are able to take care of themselves so much better than the stars of the 80s. Unfortunately, I look at some of these, matches that we've already talked about, and unfortunately, deceased. It's just it's a shame that a number of these stars, died under the age of 65. Meanwhile, we look at Johnson and Cena and Triple H, and they're taking care of themselves, and they're gonna outlive me. So,
well, here's the funny thing, though. I mean, not funny, but I don't remember. I think at WrestleMania 1, I think somebody went back through the whole card, and I think they came out with a thing. They said like basically 90% of that card,
92% of that card has passed on.
Yeah,
and the ones that are alive are, I mean, Hogan. Hogan is his physical condition is saddening every day.
Oh, yeah.
And as someone that grew up watching him, I mean, imagine you watching Stone Cold come out on crutches or in a wheelchair, what that would do to your generation.
Oh, it would make me feel incredibly old. Or I mean, I just laugh, and we'll get back because we're about to hit that transition almost into the Ruthless Aggression. But I'll say this much. I laugh now. I mean, you said it before, when people turn around and they start talking about guys like Cena and The Rock. And it's like I remember watching The Rock wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing the "Can you smell what The Rock is cooking" line.
We used to get shut up. He used to tell us to shut up, and this isn't chant with the champ, sing with the champ night.
But to me, and I laugh now because you talk to younger fans now, and you ask them who The Rock is, and they're like, "Who?"
Yeah.
But yet, if you turn around and you say Dwayne Johnson, they're like, "Oh, the guy from Tooth Fairy and the guy from Scorp Blade." I'm like, "Oh my god!" I'm not supposed to feel that old yet.
So, now I'm going to feel old because now I'm going to jump ship. I'm going to jump forward to the to the early to mid 2000s with you, John.
Yeah.
Because we just touched base on what Stone Cold and The Rock and Triple H did to the business, and they really carried the business, well beyond the end of the 90s and early 2000s. We get to 2006, and this is a great year in wrestling because Hogan's back in the company, and he goes over Orton, which is very interesting because at WrestleMania 1, Hogan wrestles Orton's father. You just mentioned that.
Yeah.
But Edge goes over John Cena for the championship. I could watch Edge wrestle his matches all day, every day. Edge, to me, is just one of the greatest of all time. And SummerSlam, I think, I always viewed as his event because he's got that kind of that pop and that draw to be kind of like I always viewed it as his kind of event. John Cena's WrestleMania, but Edge, man, he controlled SummerSlam.
Yeah. Obviously, the big match from that one that I'm just looking at right now, I'm looking over the card here quickly. Obviously, you mentioned Edge taking on Cena. You also had D-Generation X taking on Mr. McMahon and Shane McMahon.
Yeah, a very aging DX, I will say.
Oh, yeah. And the funny thing is, if you bring that up, one of the teams that was involved in that whole storyline was Spirit Squad.
With a future.
Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah.
The funny thing is,
Spirit Squad, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we actually got to interview, probably about a couple months ago. We actually interviewed one of the guys from the Spirit Squad.
Which one? Do you remember?
Mikey.
Those guys, they worked so hard to get that dumb gimmick over, and it was over, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
They were silly. They were, over the top, goony, crazy, silly, but they did with their job. And for DX to do what they did and just kind of squash them and do what they did at the end, I never really liked that. I always saw the Spirit Squad as breaking up. I would have loved to have seen them get another year together and then slowly start to, disperse. But there's my little, pop for the Spirit Squad.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. We bring up Mikey. He actually, like I said, he lives right up by me.
Yeah, you have quite a few stars and wrestlers that live up by you, but that's the joy. That's the joy of living close to the city and on the island.
Well, here's the funny thing. We'll get back because I want to get into a few other SummerSlams before we get into our predictions for tomorrow. But I think being, especially being, and I cannot believe me, I have stories I can tell you about wrestlers I've met over the years. And it blows my mind that even now, doing this podcast now for almost 2 years, a lot of these guys that I've met have been because of this podcast.
That's a great opportunity for you. I always tell people, I'm 41 years old, and I always tell people your age and younger. I sound old. I sound like a father, which I am. Take advantage of every opportunity you can. Life's not about what you know; it's about who you know. It's about the chance to meet people, make connections, and that's what wrestling has provided me. You and I are separated by about a 4.5 hour drive, yet we live in the same state. People don't understand how much different our lives are because of that. And Buffalo is still about a 4-hour drive west of me, and how much different that area is. And yet wrestling combines us all.
Exactly. But here's the funny thing, though. Obviously, you and I have a mutual friend in common.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple, but yeah, the one that introduced us. Yep.
And I will say this much. It was because of that mutual friend for why now I will make that 4 or 5 hour trip up to Schenectady, up to Cobleskill. I have to pronounce it correctly. Yes, I have to pronounce it correctly. I got chewed out last time I said that wrong. Even going to places like Troy and Utica and even Rome, for example.
Yep.
It's because going up there, obviously, yes, me being on Long Island, you think of the hustle and the bustle and all that stuff. Once you get past like Mount Vernon and you're straight on the thruway, you're in like another world.
Yeah, I always say there's about 5 different states in New York State. Same's true in Texas, California, any sizable state. But that is the beauty of wrestling, especially in the Northeast, because we've seen the WWE develop, grow. I've grown with it. It literally, I'm 41. WrestleMania was on my first year, right after I turned 1 year old.
Yeah.
So I've grown up with this. This has been your whole life.
Exactly.
And exactly. Wrestling is what brings us all together because of the story it tells. It's nonstop transition. It's nonstop flow.
And the funny thing is, I laugh because, doing this podcast now for 2 years, people have looked at me and they're like, why do you love talking about wrestling so much? And what I'm like, honestly, it's, you said it before, it's the storytelling, but it's also the fact of there's always something to talk about, which you don't get that in a lot of other sports.
Well, I've been behind the scenes. I've worked behind the scenes at some of these wrestling events live, These guys are some of the most athletic people, men and women, I should say, I apologize, are some of the most athletic people in the entire world. They bust their butts to do what they do. So when I meet them, Blaze behind the scene, or Ben Hameen, or Garrett Holiday, the independents, or I meet the big, from the bigger events or the bigger, companies, first thing I do is I thank them for what they do.
And then, like I said, I want to get back into SummerSlam here, but I'll just tell this quick story. A couple weeks ago, I made my debut in the ring. I didn't wrestle a match because, believe me, I'm the biggest klutz on God's green earth.
Yeah, I've seen you walk, John.
Yeah, thanks. But I got into the ring and I had to basically do a quick promo, minute long. I had no script in front of me. And I remember talking to some of the wrestlers at intermission because the segment I had was right before intermission. I was talking to some of them. I'm like, I commend you guys. I'm like, it was fun standing in the ring, but the funnier part was me trying to get out of the ring. That was the funnier part.
Well, yeah, because the nerves are shot. You're in front of everyone. You've already kind of, you shot your wad in the ring, part of my language,
Right, okay.
and now everyone's watching you, because on your way to the ring and getting into the ring, people are like eating popcorn, they're, whatever, on their phones. You start talking, you start working, everyone's eyes are on you. And now
But
you're
then
getting out of the ring.
But here's the funny part. I'll tell the story quickly. Titan Championship Wrestling, great company. They're
Great. Yeah, good people. Yeah.
They have two types of rings. They have a low standing ring and a high standing ring. Depends on how, I think from what I heard, it depends on how high the ceiling is in the show that we're doing. So for this show, they were at the Manchester Little League training facility. So it's a tall building, so they use the higher ring. Well, I didn't learn the proper way to get out of a ring. So I figured, I'm going to do the smart thing, go out of the ring, plop my butt on the side, and jump down that way. Like I see them do it a lot.
John, do you have tape of this? Can we upload this?
I'm waiting for them to upload it to MoFi TV. Once it gets uploaded, it'll be up there for everybody to see.
I think you need to include that in your introduction, John. So how did that go?
Well, I was going to say this much. When it finally happens, I'm going to have a special watch along for you and some other certain people.
Listen, the Jester's there for you, buddy. And if there's anybody that's going to, have your back, it ain't going to be me. I'll tell you that.
Well, the funny thing is, it would be and it's like a few people. So all of a sudden, I get to the side of the ring. Now, mind you, I'm a short person. I'm only 5'5". I kind of sat there for a second. I'm like, okay, let me try to get down because I was going to try to walk to the stairs, but they were about to start their match. So I was like, okay, I'm going to plop my ass down and jump down that way. Plop my ass down. I might as well be, if you remember, like pictures from like the early 20s, the guys who were working in New York City and they're working on the steel bars.
On the Empire State Building.
Yeah, that's what I felt like for a second. Also, I'm going, yeah, there's no way I'm going to get down here.
That padding looks a lot farther away than, the foot it is off the ground.
Well, the funny part is the ring announcer then comes around. He goes, what's wrong? I go, David, I can't get down. He goes, why not? I go, if I get down, I'm going to break my ankle. So he goes, okay. He goes, grab my shoulder. I grabbed his shoulder. I hopped down. And mind you, nobody ever taught me the proper way to jump down from a ring. So I jumped down, and I'm not a small person. Do you know what it's like having almost 295 pounds going down to your feet?
How it's your knees I would be worried about, not your feet.
Well, because the problem is the shoes I had on. I didn't have my regular sneakers on that night.
Good job.
I had shoes that I wear for work that night because I was like, oh, it's not going to be too bad. Yeah, I realize now that that's not a smart idea to do.
It's a great job, John. I can't wait to see video of this. This will be interesting.
Like I said, there's going to be a watch along for you and certain other people who it's going to be an exclusive watch along.
Before, real quick, I always love a good entrance. And you know who always had one of the best entrances was Macho Man Randy Savage. He was smooth. He could get in the ring like, you'd have no idea. He was so slick. And then he'd get up on the ropes and, put his one finger up. And, I always love and I appreciate a good entrance, a good way to pop the crowd. And when we look at tomorrow night's event, we got some really, really big stars.
Yeah, well, we'll get
that know how to pop a crowd,
Oh yeah, we'll get into Summerslam in a second. But I was going to say this much: you mentioned Macho Man. There's an interview we did. Actually, I think I put it up on our channel now. We actually interviewed his brother,
Lanny Poffo.
We interviewed him,
the genius.
And the sad part is when it was announced that he had died, the first thing I did was. It was because it was the first time it had ever happened that we actually had interviewed somebody who, and they just died. I actually turned around and go, okay, this gives me the opportunity to put up the video and not do it, not because I was trying to get views off of his passing, but I was more like, okay, here's the opportunity that we talked to somebody who was in this industry. But, obviously we can go through every SummerSlam, but we'll be here for 4 hours.
Well, and the genius had a big part, because he was Mr. Perfect's manager at one point.
Yep.
He was always used in a behind the scenes or to help get other people over, but another solid worker, Lanny Poffo.
Oh yeah, exactly. But let me ask you this now before we get into what's happening tomorrow night. Of the SummerSlams, obviously you mentioned before, that 1990, if I remember correctly, 1990 was your SummerSlam.
Yep.
When you came back to watching wrestling, what was your favorite one of that time period?
Probably that when I jumped forward to that 2006, I skipped about maybe 8 or 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
After WCW had been purchased in 2001 or 2002, whenever that was, It was hard to watch wrestling because it was just, to me, it was a lot of the stale storylines, regurgitated back to me. They were trying, the DX, the MWOs thing. So I really kind of would drop down and watch the Rumble, go back. I would drop down and watch the SummerSlam. WrestleMania was always a big event. But SummerSlam, to me, it will always hold a special place in my heart because it was the first event, my first pay-per-view. And it's what made me fall in love with wrestling, honestly.
And to me, what I will always say about SummerSlam is a lot of them get overlooked, I feel, because of your WrestleMania. And we'll, in a couple months, we're going to do one on Survivor Series. And
I got some great stories there.
But the funny thing is, with that one, we can just do a whole episode just on debuts that happen at Survivor Series.
Yeah, again, this was the old school way of telling stories. The WrestleMania was, kind of the culmination, the big event that would, we'd have the payoff matches. You'd have all the rest of spring and all of summer to set up your characters and set up your stories and start to transition to, sweeps week in September. So SummerSlam was huge. That's how big this event was. It's their number 2 event of the big 4 of the 80s and 90s, followed by Rumble and then Survivor Series.
I completely agree. But I think it's time now we get into what's happening tomorrow night. Ford Field, Detroit, Michigan. SummerSlam 2023.
Fun event. Looking at it right now on the screen.
I'm personally excited, and we're actually going to be doing a watch along for that event, which you can catch live right here on the new ATR channel. And folks, if you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe. It costs you nothing. It does wonders for us. And like I said, you can, if you subscribe and you watch all the videos, I applaud you. If you subscribe and you never watch a video, I still applaud you because you're still showing support to the channel.
And you're going to see more of Jester Jeff. So,
it's
a win-win, right, John?
Exactly. You're going to see more of Jester Jeff. You're going to see more of Billy. You're going to see more of, you're going to see who's who on this channel. But let's get going now, because like I said, this card that we're about to go through right now, what I like about it also, there's no filler matches.
The only filler match I see might be, well, it looks like they bumped the.
I know they bumped the women's match with Trish.
Yeah, the women's. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, the Trish Stratus match.
Yeah, they bumped that
in favor of the Battle Royal.
Yeah, and that supposedly they were also going to do. They were supposed to do Rhea Ripley versus Raquel, but I think they're waiting until later on.
Yeah,
to do that.
They're gonna. I think that'll be the next event's big pay-per-view main event.
Oh yeah, but I mean, like I said, you got Cody and Brock, you got Seth and Finn, you got Asuka, Charlotte and Bianca, you got Roman and Jey Uso, Ricochet and Logan Paul, Gunther and Drew McIntyre, Ronda and Shane. I mean, every match on here. It's not like they're turning around and saying, okay, well, we're just gonna put these two guys together, two gals together, and just say, okay, just give them 10 minutes, go have fun. Every one of these matches that we're gonna see tomorrow night all have a story to them.
And aside from the Brock Lesnar match, all could be a good 25-minute match with a captivating story to be told. Right. And I wouldn't be surprised if some will be. So with that, John, do you mind if I get into my picks? Is that all right?
Go right ahead. Floor is yours.
So my son, okay, we're gonna call him Director Dez. He threw his picks down on paper as well. So I'm gonna kind of read off what his picks are and my picks. All right.
You got it.
So we're going to assume that the Battle Royal is going to open the show. You can't go wrong with the Battle Royal. I love Battle Royals. It's just an exciting, fun way. You get a bunch of stars in the ring. Great opportunity to push some guys, to get some faces out there that might not otherwise be in the show. My son, Director Des, he's going to go with Otis as going over in this match. He just likes Otis. He likes the way he works. He says he's a fun guy. Loves the way he rolls around in the ring. Again, another big fun guy. I, of course, am going to go with LA Knight. This guy's time has come. If this isn't his, if they don't start pushing him now and giving him his, solid push into the fall and build him up to WrestleMania, I don't know when they are. What do you think?
I completely agree with you. I think this has to be LA Knight's moment here, because you're talking about a guy right now who not only is who got over, by the way, not because of the machine. He got over with the crowd. And also, again,
just like The Rock, just like Cena, just like Stone Cold, comes out, basic mic work.
Not only that, now he now owns, I read something recently, I think he owns 4 out of the top 5 t-shirt sales right now. I think he just dethroned Roman like a couple weeks ago.
Merch. It's all about merch. It's where they make their money.
I said, I agree.
It's where the company makes money. It's where
I think LA Knight gets the win here in the Battle Royal.
So, I'm going to go in reverse order of what's on, website here. So the next match on the website is going to be Ronda Rousey versus Shayna Baszler. Director Des is going to go with Ronda Rousey, even though Ronda is rumored to be on her way out of the company. Entrance, armbar, can't lose. It's an MMA style match. How do you vote against Ronda? Okay, going up against her friend. She helped train Shayna. You can't vote against Ronda in that kind of match. And I originally was going to go with Shayna, but I'm going to agree with that Director Des, and I'm going to go with Ronda Rousey in just an ultimate MMA style match in an armbar finish after 12 minutes. What do you think?
I'm going to go different here. I'm going Shayna. I think
really.
And I say that because of what you just said before about Ronda leaving. I think you give Shayna the win here, and you can actually give her a little bit of a push, where after what happens with Raquel and Rhea, or even Io, Bianca, Asuka, and Charlotte, you can easily put Shayna into one of those 2 categories, I think.
See, I think they just don't know what to do with Shayna. They have they have Rhea's storyline booked out. And we'll talk about Rhea at a future podcast, but I don't know if this is Shayna's night. Now, Intercontinental Championship match: Gunther versus the returning Drew McIntyre. I want you to pick. I want your pick first, and I'm going to tell you what I pick.
I got to go with the ring general himself, the guy who's been on a tear with that IC title, who's made that IC title relevant again. The guy formerly known as Walter. Give me Gunther.
Same here. I love the way Hunter is booking this. I love the way we're giving legitimacy back to the Intercontinental Championship. Back in the 80s, that used to be the strap that they would put on the best worker in the ring. You're talking about Mr. Perfect, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. You're talking about some of the greatest stars of all time started with the Intercontinental Championship. Give Gunther his record-breaking run. Let him drop the belt right before Survivor Series. Push him to WrestleMania and let him go over.
Oh, I can believe. Okay, let me ask you this then quickly. Who do you think would be the one to eventually dethrone him?
I think you're looking at LA Knight. I think this is LA Knight's push that they are going to have him and Gunther square off. That's just, my crazy booking theories. I don't know. We'll see.
I got another one who I think it could be. I completely agree. I think it could be LA Knight. I got one, and after what we just saw with him on Monday, it wouldn't be a normal possibility. How about Chad Gable?
Here's another one that, Desmond was looking at to win to Director Des had actually mentioned his name to win the Battle Royal. I think, honestly, whoever wins this Battle Royal, they're going to start to slowly push into, that B title matches by Survivor Series. Gunther, I see being in the championship run next year, honestly. Him and Cody, I think, could tear it up down the line. Him and Seth could do an amazing job. You got a high flyer versus an old school, worker like Gunther, ring general. I just think he could really go out there and just tear it up with anybody. So,
And who does producer English? It's there.
Director Des. Don't get his name wrong. He'll come flying for you.
Who does he pick?
For what?
For Gunther and Drew.
Oh, he picks Gunther. Yeah, when he's on WWE 2K23, he always wrestles at Gunther. He puts Gunther up against everybody, and he just lets Gunther run wild. That guy's chops are vicious. By the end of the match, his opponent's shirts or chests are more red than my shirt here. So,
all right. So next match, you want me to
talk about high flyers? You got Ricochet versus Logan Paul. These two could be the main event. I mean, look at what they did in the Rumble, flying across the ring the way they did. I legitimately popped like a 10-year-old boy watching wrestling for the first time. My girlfriend, who had never seen wrestling prior to this, goes, "What did they just do?" I said, "I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before." And you're talking Logan Paul, a YouTube star, who comes out and within 1 year has become so over and just... I think this is his match to lose. They got to give it to him, right? I mean, but both director and I say so. So the director and Jester both say Logan Paul.
I will put it this way. I agree with Logan Paul, but I also think this finally gives Ricochet that moment to catapult himself into a bigger storyline down the road.
Yeah, I mean, whoever goes over in this match, this is not going to be a quick 5-minute blow off. This is going to be a hard-fought, high-flying, old-school Shawn Michaels versus Marty Jannetty Rockers kind of match. I mean, you're talking guys that are going to be flying off the rope into the crowd kind of match. These guys put their bodies on the line, and how Logan Paul is still walking is beyond me.
Next match we got here is a interesting match, but it's going to see Roman Reigns as obviously.
Can we hold that till the end? Because I think that's going to be our main event. Why don't we go with the women's championship match? What are your thoughts on this, John?
Obviously, it's Asuka taking on Charlotte Flair, taking on Bianca Belair. First of all, I don't think Bianca's getting the title here, but I think with Bianca, I think we're going to finally see that full-blown heel turn.
Agreed. I think Bianca would work really well as a heel. Sometimes your best faces can be your best heels and vice versa. Look at what Hogan did in the late 90s. Look at Savage. Look at all those guys. So I'm going to go a different direction. Director Des says Asuka is going to go over here. She's going to retain in a really good match. Bianca's going to get pinned, but she's going to be, she's definitely going to be the heel. I personally say Charlotte Flair is going to pick up the championship again. How do you go against the Queen? I saw her father win his first WWF championship in '92. I'm going to watch her win again tomorrow night. Prove me wrong.
I got to agree with your son. I got to go Asuka on this one. I don't think Charlotte's getting the title here.
Get out of the ring, John. Go fall again.
Yeah, I'll go do that. That's not a problem. Next match we got here. This one's going to be an interesting one. Seth Rollins versus Finn Balor for the World Heavyweight Championship.
The director and I are split on this. The director, one of his favorite wrestlers has always been Finn Balor. I don't think we're going to see the Demon, obviously, but Finn is going to go over, director says. I think this is Seth's big run. I think this is the company giving Seth a big thank you for all the work he's done. That guy has practically carried this company on his back through all of the transitions over the past couple of years. Cena in, Cena out. Cody out, Cody coming back. Brock in, Brock, Meanwhile, you've had Seth the whole time. He's reinvented his character. He's Seth freaking Rollins. He's the main event. He's the guy. I think he wins.
You're going to laugh who I'm going to go with because we actually talked about this on our show on Tuesday. There's another name you got to think about for this match.
Damian Priest. So do you think he cashes in and makes it a triple threat a la Seth did at WrestleMania? Or do you think he cashes in after a bloody match and takes advantage of a tired champion?
I mean, I did read something that supposedly they were setting up a triple threat match for Payback between Seth, Finn, and Damian. I think somehow somehow I see some wonky finish here where I think Seth will retain. You see more of a dissension between Finn and Damian. And, with Judgment Day. And ultimately that leads to payback. Because how appropriate would it be to have all of a sudden you have the triple threat match and all of a sudden, all of a sudden, let's say Finn wins that match. And I think they're in Pittsburgh for that one. And then all of a sudden Damian turns around and goes, oh, well, it's time for me to get my payback. And he cashes in then.
I love longer storytelling. I'd want to see more out of this. I want to see it drawn out. I want to see more of a payoff. I love the idea of a Damian Priest, turn and betrayal and push. I think WrestleMania is his time. So I think Survivor Series, Rumble, one of those events is when he should do it. But I could be wrong. The Jester's been wrong before. Not often.
Well, here's the funny thing. I think if they wait till WrestleMania, I think you're going to get a humongous pop for one reason. People forget Damian Priest is from Jersey.
And where's WrestleMania?
Philadelphia.
And how close are they? Just right up the Atlantic City Expressway.
Yeah, about maybe 2 hours, about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Tickets for WrestleMania go on sale August 18th. Jester Jeff's girlfriend doesn't know yet, but their bank account might be drained come August 18th.
Well, I'm going to put it this way. There may be a little podcast, Jester Jeff, that you're actually a part of right now, who may be there as a media member.
Well, if you're there and I'm there, we have to get together, okay?
Oh, absolutely. Even if I don't get a ticket for the event, I'm still going with Ryan, my co-host. I'm still going to make the trip down there just to get the experience down there.
How do you not? Yeah. I mean, there's few sporting events I've always wanted to be a part of. The MLB All-Star. I could skip the Super Bowl. I'd want to see the NHL All-Star. I'd want to see a World Series and WrestleMania.
And unfortunately, I think when you mentioned baseball All-Star and World Series, being that you're a Yankee fan and I'm a Met fan, I think we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for that.
I don't know why you had to mention that. I liked you up until now, and now this is my turn. So I'm going to just ignore you from here on out. We're going to start talking strictly wrestling, and we're going to go with Cody versus Brock Lesnar.
I got Cody in this one.
Yeah, this is the payoff match. They're 1-1. I think this is Brock's chance to finally put Cody over and set him on his way to the next step towards redemption. I think this is what that story is all about, is redemption for Cody. Ultimately, if you don't see him versus, the champion at WrestleMania and Cody finally going over, I think you're short-sighted. But I think this is the Triple H's storytelling that he's doing. It's all about redemption. It's going to be a short match, but Cody's going to go over.
Completely agree. And
the championship.
Well, I would say, what did your son pick for that one?
Oh, Cody. It's the American. He wrote American Nightmare on here, and
okay.
His handwriting, because he's left-handed, might give me a nightmare, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, main event time.
Main event. Old school entrances. What was I talking about? Old school entrance and that look and how you carry yourself, and you can just tell the crowd to, to blow off just by your facial expressions. Roman's got it, and he's going up against his cousin. Jay, what do you think, John?
Well, I have a possible theory of somebody who may show up in that match.
Rikishi? The Rock.
And I say that for one reason. If you remember, him and Grayson Waller had been feuding on Twitter lately. Or the X. Sorry, I have to use the proper terminology now. Actors and writers are on strike right now in Hollywood.
Yeah.
He's not filming anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
Why not have that?
And he can't promote anything.
Nope. Exactly. And why not have that perfect moment now? Thank God Ford Field doesn't have a roof on it, because I don't think they would if that were to happen. And I think that's how we finally get Roman and Rock. I think as far as who wins it, I think Roman retains because they're keeping him on this run. And I think it's going to be a hard fought battle. I'm not saying it won't be, but I think you're also going to get a lot of shenanigans in this match.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get a lot of, I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this. You're going to get a lot of stuff that's going to make it seem very wonky.
Well, the director here, in his infinite wisdom, he does have Jey Uso going over, but not necessarily winning the belt. Again, I also have Roman winning, but either whoever wins this, Roman's going to retain the championship. Count on a DQ. Somehow it's going to be, a sloppy match. But I like the idea of The Rock coming out. The whole Hanoi family. I would love that story, if they slowly start to bring out, one or two members at a time, Uncle Sika, the headbangers or the head shrinkers, the original Samoans. You start to bring out the dads and the grandfathers and the uncles and old school storytelling, back to what I talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You start to gap those generations, bridge the gap of the generations, and show just where Jey Uso and Solo Sikoa, where they all came from and where The Rock came from. And they ultimately defeat Roman by WrestleMania. Love it.
Yeah. But guys, that was our predictions. Let us know in the comments below what your predictions are. Again, Jester Jeff, I hope you had fun tonight.
I had a great time. Thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure, definitely. And guys, tune in tonight when this thing airs, for the watch along, where who knows who will be on there, as we will give you our reactions to SummerSlam. Then tune in this coming Tuesday as myself and Ryan Peterson give you the fallout from SummerSlam, talk a little bit about All In, and then I put the poster out earlier. The 9:00 hour on Tuesday will be all about Immortal Championship Wrestling ahead of their big show called This Is Immortal, happening August 12th up in Utica, New York.
Love it. All around the Ropes podcast. Thank you for having me. John, great work. Love what you do. Let's keep the channel going. Let's keep the channel growing. People, subscribe. Do what you got to do. Let's get this growing.
For Jester Jeff, I'm John. This has been a YouTube exclusive for the Around the Ropes podcast, and we'll catch you guys later on for the watch along.